We are a little under 10 games into the 2023 season right now, and things could not be more weird. It seems like every expectation that people had for every team is just way out of whack. So let's talk about those expectations and how things have just been really weird, and whether or not these weird things are a product of an early season, or if these are things that are going to stick around. The Utah Jazz are currently the third seed in the Western Conference, and they look like a genuinely very competent basketball team. And this is in spite of the fact that this team was expected to be easily the worst roster in the entire league. While they did have some pretty damn talented players on the team, it didn't seem as though there would be any cohesion to the roster, especially because a lot of these players were playing together for the first time with a head coach who was a head coach for the first time. So it didn't really seem like this would work out and like all these role players would just get shipped out, but they have played together phenomenally. They have a system in place that is making up for the fact that none of them are amazing shot creators. They have been passing like the 2014 freaking Spurs, and it's gone a long way. And as for whether or not this is going to stick around, I have to say I don't think they're going to continue to be the third seed, but it is very well within the realm of possibility that they are a play-in level team. Not because they're necessarily the most talented in the world, but because the system they have in place, the mentality that they play with, it is exceeding any talent limitation. The next biggest surprise is the San Antonio Spurs, who are also a top seed in the Western Conference after losing DeJounte Murray, again a team that was expected to be one of the worst teams in all of basketball, ending up being one of the top teams in the conference. And this one's a little bit more perplexing to me because when I've watched the Spurs, it was less like an obvious, well, this is their secret type thing. It just seems as though everybody's come to play. Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson being the obvious ones. They're getting a lot of production, defensively at least, out of their rookie. I think his last name is Sohan. I haven't seen a bunch of them, but granted, obviously they have really good coaching, but they had good coaching in the past and it didn't result in this. So it's very weird to see them be this much better. I guess you could attribute it to finally unlocking those players by losing DeJounte, which I definitely thought was possible, but I didn't think it would result in winning to the degree that it has right now. That said, because I'm not seeing any kind of secret sauce with them, granted I could be missing it, I'm going to say probably not gonna continue to be this good. Another team which is not as big of a thing, but you know, the Charlotte Hornets without LaMelo Ball have been not terrible. And that's pretty significantly because of Dennis Smith Jr., who they signed this last offseason, and it was pretty much his last opportunity to prove himself to be an NBA level point guard, because it really didn't seem like he was. Turns out, dude's been fantastic so far. He's had a couple of near triple doubles. His playmaking looks better than it ever has before. His efficiency shooting the ball is still not great, although his mid-range pull-up looks pretty nice, although I'm not sure what the actual efficiency metric on that is. But he has been balling out for them and made it to where they're not skipping much of a beat without LaMelo. So when LaMelo comes back, then having Dennis come off of the bench is like a really damn solid six-man, presuming that his play holds up. That's really cool. And shout out to Dennis Smith, because it's nice to see him playing good basketball again, especially for those people who really thought he was going to be good. Now, all of these bad teams being good means on the flip side, a lot of good teams have to be bad, or at least the way we perceive them to be as good teams have to be bad, because maybe these early season struggles are a sign that these teams are bad. No championship team has ever been under 500 over their first 10 games. And we're seeing a lot of teams right now that are approaching the 10 game mark that are under 500 and look as though they will be after that 10 game threshold. The Golden State Warriors are one of them. The Clippers are one of them. Although you could at least argue Kawhi not being there is a factor for the Clippers. But in the Warriors case, there's very little to blame other than just Klay Thompson being terrible. Jordan Poole started off the season poorly, and their defense has just simply fallen off of a cliff. Now, whether or not that's Draymond Green regressing, maybe Wiggins isn't bringing on that end, I haven't really seen why they've fallen so hard defensively, but they have to clean that up quickly if they're going to be turning around and trying to repeat as champions. Not to mention, they've really been hoping for their young guys to step up and really bring a lot of bench production, and it looked like that was going to happen in the preseason. It hasn't looked as hot in the regular season. Not that there haven't been moments for guys like Kuminga, Moody, and even James Wiseman, although he's easily the worst performing of the three right now. The fact that they're not getting much from them, which overall means they're not getting much from their bench, means they're asking more of a nearly 35-year-old Steph Curry. And if Draymond's regressed, Klay Thompson has very clearly regressed, I do worry that this team might be on its last legs. So as for whether or not this is going to stick around, I don't know. I'm kind of split on it. I don't think they're going to continue to be, I believe they're the 11th seed right now, something like that, but they probably are not going to finish as the 1 seed, let's just say that. As for the Clippers, I just did a really in-depth video over on my second channel. If you want to hear my thoughts on that, that will be right there in the corner right there, if I remember to put it there. But the Clippers' biggest problem really has been the inconsistency of the offensive talent on the team, as well as their really low pace combined with their really high turnover rate. If you are a low-paced team, you're typically expected to be a low turnover team. And if you're a high turnover team, it's usually because you're a high-paced team and you're just throwing passes all over the place, trying to make home run plays all the time. Meanwhile, a lower-paced, more passive team trying to focus on being more methodical and just getting the right shot, generally going to be a lower turnover team. However, the Clippers thus far have been the highest turnover team in all of basketball while being the second lowest pace in all of basketball. This has resulted in more field goal attempts by a significant margin for their opponents, and even if the defense does a pretty good job with those extra 13 or so possessions, having those extra possessions is really going to make it harder to outscore them. If your opponent gets 13 more shots per game, 13 more opportunities to score than you do, even if you're playing overall good defense, those extra opportunities can be the difference maker, and that's what it's been for the Clippers thus far. Not to mention the very obvious thing, which is that Paul George has just been awful out of the gate. Other than a 40-piece he had against the Kings, he's had nothing but stinkers. We got to talk about the Heat, and there's also the Brooklyn Nets. I'm not really going to talk about the Nets. I'm getting to the point where I'm genuinely so burnt out about talking about them. There was enough of a stretch between the offseason drama and the regular season starting drama and the head coaching stuff, which I also did a second channel video, once again right there if I remember. So I'm not really going to talk about the Nets all that much, or really at all, but I've made my opinion on them I've made my opinion clear. It's 2 videos from this one, so just go watch that if you really want to. But let's talk about the Miami Heat, because they're probably the most under the radar struggling team right now. The Heat are currently the 12th seed with a 3-5 record, and the main issues have been Kyle Lowry has been bad and he is severely overpaid at that. Bam has not met the aggression standard that he claimed he would be. And one thing that really stood out to me from watching them and looking at the stats is that their perimeter defense, not as good as you would expect it to be. I mean, part of that's because you have guys like Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero out there at times, and that can make a difference, but also Kyle Lowry's not really stepping up to the extent you would hope, and defensively overall, I would argue even Bam's taken a little bit of a step back early on in the season, and as a result, teams are shooting 39% from 3 against them. And if you're going to give up that high of a 3-point percentage, if teams are going to be that hot against you, you're not going to win a lot of games, especially if you're also not a good half-court offense, which the Heat have pretty much never been. So if you have a poor offense and your defense is not amazing, which the Heat defense pretty typically is, it's going to result in some losing. Now, you could chalk some of this up to just some really hot early season shooting, but I would say it really just seems like they're their energy on the perimeter is a little lackluster. But as for all of these contenders, I already said the Warriors will probably turn things around to some extent. The Nets at this point, like, I think they'll be a play-in, play-off, lower seed team, maybe. The Miami Heat's probably in a similar tier, maybe a 5 seed. I don't know. It really depends on if they flip things around. I'm really 50-50 on them, I would say. And the Clippers, I think as soon as Kawhi Leonard is back, presuming that he can be back relatively consistently, then we're good. But, you know, that's a whole question mark in itself, and there'll probably be a video about that. But yeah, the league has just been very upside down, and I find it very interesting. Stuff like this happens all the time early on in the season, so it's not that it's particularly unique, but I think it's fun to think back to shit like this. It's interesting to see how different things can be over a year. I remember last year, like, the Orlando Magic were really good to open the year, which has happened a few times, you know. And the Cavs were good to open, and we were like, is this real, or are the Cavs good to open again for like the 3rd year in a row, and then it falls back into the mean. But yeah, just really interesting stuff early on, and I wanted to talk about it. But that is it. Goodbye.